Joining me now here in Zuccotti Park in New York is Sarah Ludwig of NEDAP. NEDAP is the Neighborhood Economic Development Advocacy Project. Say that many times fast. They not only work to provide services to people in low-income neighborhoods, but to advocate policy around financial justice and housing in particular. Sarah's been a regular guest on GritTV, and we've been hearing for years now about a housing crisis. The sound, the sort of noise around foreclosures and mortgage crises seems to have dropped, but that doesn't get reflected in the numbers as far as I know. What are we seeing factually around this crisis in housing?
Well, what we're seeing factually is that the numbers just keep spiking, they keep mounting. The numbers are anything but going down. It's expected another many millions of foreclosures in 2011. 2010 was already a record year. It's expected that we're going to have many more foreclosures this year and next through 2013. And it's really this sort of self-perpetuating, reinforcing phenomenon. As the economy gets worse, more people lose work, they can't pay their mortgages, you see more and more people losing their homes as a result. What really started as waves of predatory, abusive, discriminatory lending practices that brought on millions of foreclosures through the 2000s, then up till the the financial meltdown, and what we talked about as a sort of peaking crisis, is now just spinning out of control.
I mention it because a lot of the money media coverage of what's happening here at Occupy Wall Street has talked about, oh, they're just people that don't have anywhere else to go, they're homeless, as if that wasn't a political issue, how much of a growth in homelessness and poverty we're seeing.
Yeah, there's a growth in homelessness and poverty, and there's also huge mental and physical health implications of this. We're having tremendous burdens put on our social and human services programs around the country as more and more people are seeking medical care because they don't have homes, children who are being bounced from school to school. So if we started to map out the consequences of this foreclosure crisis, it would be a huge canvas, and it would be a very bleak one. And I think the narrative around what's going on right now with Occupy Wall Street really needs to focus on this very stark inequity and this very, we'll call it a black and white picture, where you've got the largest banks, the 6 largest banks, and let's name them. We've got Bank of America, multi-trillion-dollar global financial institution, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. These large banking institutions make more than $199 million in profit a day. They've already been bailed out to the tune of hundreds of billions of public dollars. They know that they'll be bailed out again. They continue, however, to engage in risky, predatory, discriminatory practices. There's been no accountability of these banks. The financial reform law was tepid at best, the federal financial reforms. The work is very far from done. And, we see this real sort of starkness. Meanwhile, some of these banks, will take Bank of America, paid 0% in taxes. Wells Fargo in the 7.5% tax rate. So it's not subtle. And so the American public need to understand that this is a question about fairness. This is about accountability. This is about, these corporations, meanwhile, are engaged in very, very aggressive lobbying against any kind of consumer protection or meaningful financial reforms. They have spent something like $600 million lobbying against financial reform. That's just the 6 big ones. And they've basically captivated our government. I mean, they write the laws, they block the laws, and it's worse than having status quo.
And what does that have to do with the occupation here behind us, in your view?
What I think it has to do with the occupation behind us is that people are really fed up with these gross inequities. There are many people, our sort of world of banking and finance, it's really just sort of taken over, it's saturated people's social lives into our social fabric. So we could talk about the people who come to our organization, people who have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt, who can't begin to pay that. When they default on that student debt, which is never forgivable, you can't discharge that in bankruptcy, just to cite one example, they end up getting that on their credit reports. Employers now look at people's credit to decide whether or not to even give people a job. So you start to see how these financial justice issues really are pervasive and permeate our social and economic fabrics, and you realize that things have to be done very, very differently if we're going to turn things around.
And are you hearing people talk about this here behind me?
People are talking about this inequality. They're talking about the inability to get jobs. They're talking about unemployment. They're talking about the fact that they don't have adequate health insurance to pay for even routine hospital visits that can land them in the thousands of dollars of debt. Debt is now sold, for pennies on the dollar, and it's big lucrative business to be buying up, gobbling up people's debts. And so the engine continues to be stoked by really negative forces and for bad reasons. So yeah, people here are caught up in this web, whether it's student loan debt, consumer debt, foreclosure, certainly, homelessness, and so forth. And it affects all of us, whether we're here in the park or not.
Barack Obama and actually Fed Chairman Bernanke were asked about Occupy Wall Street in the last 24 hours. It has yet to permeate, I think, the discussions around the mortgage crisis and regulating the mortgage industry and the financial reform law discussion. To what extent do you think they who are right now considering legislation need to listen to the people here who are saying none of the little fixes you're talking about are going to do it for us? And they certainly, the ones that have been made already, haven't worked yet.
Yeah, the message needs to be loud and clear that the change needs to be significant and meaningful. Right now, there are millions of people in this country who are in default on their mortgage, they're struggling with their mortgage, and the name of the game for the banks and the companies that they hire, the servicers, is to basically be roadblocks and make it really difficult for people to get into, to stay in their homes. And so you have millions of people who've lost their homes just because of bank recalcitrance. Banks have been bailed out, they get tremendous public subsidy, and our government has an obligation to treat them like a public utility. I mean, they have that function, and in effect, that's what they become, eating at the profit the way that they have.
Sarah Ludwig, what can people do if they want to get more information about NEDAP or any of the issues that you've raised here?
Oh, please go to our website, which is nedap.org, NEDAP.org. There's a lot of really good coalition work going on and a lot of really creative work going on at the community level to create and build neighborhood-based financial cooperatives to make sure that people are able to stay in their homes and to protest evictions of people who've been foreclosed on. So get in touch with us. We'll hook you up with groups around the country that are engaged in neighborhood-based thinking about very different ways of housing and so forth.
And I encourage people to check out the Occupy Wall Street website, where there is now a statement of concern. And I think the second item on that list of concerns has to do with illegal trickery on behalf of the banks when it comes to issuing mortgages. My words, not theirs. But check it out, occupywallstreet.org. Sarah, you excited by all this?
I think it's great. I mean, we've been living with decades of targeting of communities with abusive, usurious payday loans, fraudulent mortgage practices, discrimination built into our financial services system. So I think there's this tremendous opportunity to really think clearly about how we can change things, and there's a real optimism around it, so it gives me hope.
All right, me too. Thanks for coming by. You're watching Free Speech TV's live special coverage from Occupy Wall Street. Stay tuned.